everyone. This is Nick with Tenacity.ai, and you're listening to the Cloud Cost Optimization Podcast. Today with my co-host Jason, we are going to dive into how to tackle your cloud cost management challenges with a FinOps mindset. So how do you take the kind of the technical nitty-gritty of what do you need to do and apply, the framework that FinOps helps employ to tackle these issues. So Jason, I guess let's dive right in. What are the components of FinOps that are going to really help organizations address these cloud cost management challenges?
Oh, well, there's there's probably more than we're going to get through in this episode, right? But yeah. We could start with allocating the entire environment out in your business context, which really, it goes around developing a strategy around how you're going to do that, whether it's a tagging strategy, how you're going to monitor this infrastructure to make sure that you're aligning your strategy or your KPIs with some of the outputs the goals that the individual team members are going to perform for you. So, I would say, it's about the first thing you're going to do is define the strategy, make sure you understand what you have today, getting a full list of that. And if you have some gaps in your tagging strategy, it's about fixing those first and foremost, because it's the first thing we need to do is understand what we have so that we can make sure that we have the right stakeholders involved in the process. And then that goes down the line with a number of other things that will come after that. But what's another thing, Nick?
Well, actually, I want to talk about this one a little bit because I think this is a really good topic and it's important to get this right first. So, mapping your cloud data to the business. I mean, it's simple. It's one of the very first things you learn when you're learning about FinOps. And I think it's something that a lot of organizations miss. And even when they think they have tackled it, they're actually missing components of it because they take an affirmative approach. So they query, so they'll tag some subset of the environment and then they'll query around that tag and they'll get a cost that goes with that query, right? And we actually take a conformity approach where we say, all right, great, we have a bunch of stuff that's tagged. Let's look at all the stuff that's not tagged or is tagged and not allocated out to a budget somewhere because we want that stuff to conform to your allocation strategy. Even if the particular cost, we don't know where to put it, then we actually tag it that way. We say this is unknown. Yeah. We say we don't know where this goes. And at least then we can start reporting up on, hey, business line 1, 2, and 3, here's your direct costs, here's your shared costs. And by the way, for all of you, here is a set of other costs that we don't know where they go. And we're all sharing the burden of that until we figure it out.
Yeah, well, exactly. And then you can start to create goals and KPIs around buying down the portion of your environment that you can't allocate out. Yeah, exactly. I mean, this plays along with another one, which I don't even know if we're going to bring up, but the transparency and visibility that you need to provide to the team, right? And, so if you know that half of your environment isn't tagged in the way that you want, that's a good thing. Now you can actually make goals on, let's get that down to 40%. Let's get that down to a third. Let's get that down to a quarter. But yeah, it's just that we do that all the time. It's the best way to tackle that particular issue. Usually people get caught up in that. Well, my entire environment's not tagged or my shared resources aren't tagged. And it's like a hang up. It's like, so half of it is go do that half. And then let's set some goals for the other half. Right. It's really, it's about getting that visibility, and it doesn't have to be perfect right away because it's going to be way better than what you have today, right? And doing it immediately.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's iterative. So this is yet another principle there, and I'm throwing this one in. I know there's kind of 3 big areas we're going to talk about, but I'm going to throw in this iterative piece because you don't have to be perfect on the first go around. Like, get it somewhat right so you can have some conversations and then iterate. And you're going to have to iterate anyway because the environment changes and they change a lot. Especially if you're in the cloud native world and you're actually doing greenfield development for your new product lines, et cetera, it is going to change a ton. So you need to have an iterative process in order to keep readdressing this conformative approach as opposed to an affirmative approach.
Yeah.
So
I agree.
Let's see. The second one, I think we would say you want to bring from a FinOps mindset to address cloud cost management challenges is getting to a data-driven approach. Buzzword for 20 years in IT. We want to have data-driven decision making. There are a ton of IT business intelligence folks that are both shaking and nodding their head right now. And it's in my experience, being inside organizations, a lot of times we're trying to get to a data-driven approach, and we think sometimes we're there, and then we find out, really the data guys know this, but we find out it's not really the effective approach. And FinOps helps prescribe, ways of doing data-driven decision making, especially once we have the environment mapped out to the different business units. Now we can actually have conversations around where we want to optimize the environment, because there's a ton of considerations there. There's the business, there's the unit economics, there is the development strategies and methodologies. We want to be sure that whatever philosophy the developers are using is also being accounted for, because when you start just optimizing environments from kind of a one-size-fits-all approach, you ignore some of the superpower of cloud. And certainly if you're not doing it in the context of your business or the context of your development team, you're gonna run into a lot of issues, a lot of hurdles along the way. So I think, taking that data, now that you have the environments mapped, and then using this data-driven decision approach is much more effective than sort of the classic, somebody gives the directive, we need to reduce costs, and inevitably falls to an engineer to start making some decisions, and they start cleaning up the environment from an engineer's point of view, which no offense to engineers, I am one, but it can be fairly narrow, right, guys? I mean, we can look at we look at it from how we need to look at it, not necessarily understanding maybe where there is consideration for the business or their needs in the future.
It becomes like tasked with that task in and of itself to a singular person, or just even one or two people, is extremely difficult in a large organization that's spending, hundreds of thousands of dollars a month and, millions per year in cloud infrastructure. And it's usually a paralyzing task, because they only have you only have so much information about a handful of things. It's in an environment, without looking at something and go, well, it doesn't look like it's being used, so let's shut it off to see who complains about it. I mean, that's really what a lot of these engineers are tasked with doing, or at least they're being tasked with going to do something that's very hard for them to actually do on the back end. And I think the data-driven approach plays right in with the continuous improvement. I mean, you can't avoid past mistakes without utilizing the data to make decisions in the future to continuously improve, right? And the only way to avoid having an environment go back into a state of non-optimization is by not making those decisions with data, by just telling somebody to go do something.
Yeah, and so I'd like to give an example, because I think it helps for those who are listening to think about. Here's a real world example that as an engineer I could face, and I have had to face, both as an engineer or as an architect and in leadership roles. I see a plan that's available to us where I can go drive significant discount for a commitment. And I see a certain level of spend. But one of the first things I might think is, I'm never going to get buy-in because of the upfront cost. How many times has that happened in my career, where someone's come to me and given me a solution, and I go, wait a minute, isn't there like a slightly better solution? They go, nobody will ever pay for that. And I'm like, hold on. We do the analysis. We show the cost of capital. Let's actually show this to the business and give them the option to say no to it. Don't say no for them. Give them the option to say no to it. But I want to bring that back a sec before we even get there. There are, when you start looking at the data, then you start thinking about the environment, and do you have modernization efforts come up? coming up in the future, or have the modernization efforts already been done? Is the app going to transition, or any components of the app going to transition over a near, mid, or long-term period that you want to consider when you're looking at rate optimization plans? And when you start to consider all that, you start to find that there is a bar, a base of spending that's always going to be there. And that's an opportunity for a huge win to look at the data, say, hey, 50% of our spend is always going to be there. So let's go buy the most aggressive plan and get the deepest discount for just that piece. And then we'll layer on strategies for the rest of it. You can't do that blind. You can't do that with guesswork. You have to do that with data, and you have to include the business and finance in those decisions. And I guarantee you, if you go to your CFO with a plan like that, they're going to applaud you for having driven a 50, 60, 70% discount, even on a subset of that spending, because they want to smooth that spending over the next 3 years. They're going to be happy with that. That's an example of taking a data-driven approach, as opposed to I've reduced all the environments. I've right-sized all of my EC2 instances. I've right-sized my SQL instances, and I bought a couple of reserved instances. It's going to be a far better plan than just kind of ad hoc doing it.
I think if the business says no to something, that especially if there are a number of people that feel very strongly about it, it's usually in the delivery of the data to make that decision. The reason why the business says no, so typically, you just have the data presented in a way with the facts behind it, and most of those decisions get approved, right? Even if you're spending more money. I mean, it's not all about the dollars you spend in the cloud, right?
True.
It's also about supportability. It's also about, you could tell me this is half the cost, but it's going to take twice the people to manage. That doesn't make much sense, right?
Well, and it's also variance. It also depends on who you are, what type of organization you are. If you're publicly traded, you do not want a massive variance to the positive or the negative. So you may be adopting strategies that smooth your spending as opposed to reducing your spending. That's, you need to understand what type of business you are.
This is like my favorite question. Sometimes some of this is on the business, because my favorite question in those situations is which option would you choose if money wasn't an object? That usually gets somebody's true opinion out there. Or tell me the option that you didn't present to me, right? Because you didn't think I was going to say yes to it. Which option did you want up here that you wouldn't put up here because you thought we wouldn't say yes to it? Those are the best questions for the business. So the business owns some culpability there. But yeah, I mean, listen, everybody wants to make the right decisions. It's how we present that to stakeholders of the organization.
Yeah, and I'll just add that on the flip side of that, that's one side of the questions. On the flip side of that is sometimes we don't understand the opportunity cost, right? Like there may be a big acquisition coming up, and we don't want to deploy a bunch of capital into a plan that's going to drive some discounts just because that capital is necessary for something else right now. So the opportunity cost would be, lost potential revenue in the future.
What revenue won't I get if I say no to this, right? That's often not contemplated, right? If I don't make this decision, do we have to alter our revenue and profitability projections, right?
That's right.
Those are also costs.
So we've entered actually the third component of FinOps mindset brings to help you solve those cloud cost optimization challenges or cloud cost management challenges, which is collaboration. I mean, it is stunning how the bigger an organization it gets, how poor the collaboration can become outside of these kind of micro organizations and micro cultures that develop inside of an organization. And FinOps really drives the collaboration between your engineering teams, DevOps, whatever they are inside of your organization, your business, and your finance team. And that may include procurement and other key stakeholders, et cetera. But it really drives the coming together of those organizations to think about cloud cost governance, to think about what strategy you're going to take, to understand things like unit economics, right? I mean, when you really start diving down into cloud cost unit economics, product sometimes finds out that their pricing is poor, right? That they need to price differently, or finance finds out that, wait a minute, all of this spending is actually a good thing because we're spending, half as much as the, growth of revenue says that we should. Those are all good things to come out of that collaboration. So I think that's the third component of what FinOps really drives home.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Nick.
No, man, please. Go ahead.
All right. Yeah, the cross-functional team is important. IT, finance, business, and the business units that are applicable. That's, in reality, it's probably one of the first things that you should take a look at, even though, depending on who's in charge of this, but it's definitely in the top three. And this team is responsible for, they're responsible and accountable for understanding the organization's cloud costs, and that their spending aligns with business objectives, and where spending doesn't, then it gets discussed. Why is this here? What's going on? Usage and spending, right? Why? Mm-hmm. What are we using this for? Should it be there, right? That team is ultimately accountable for all the things that you would need done from a FinOps perspective. So crucially important.
Absolutely. I liken it to, the shifts we've seen in culture in the past. And I like to talk about agile, and people are going to roll their eyes here, but because I remember it as an idea that started to germinate inside of organizations, and it completely shifted the way we thought about software engineering. And it took silos and broke them. I mean, I don't, if you didn't experience that transition, I don't know how to describe it other than to say, talk to somebody who did experience that transition and how siloed even development organizations could be before Agile came along and broke the waterfall methodology, where you kind of went into a vacuum and you developed your data strategy, you developed your middleware, and you developed your front end, and it brought everybody together, all the time, daily, right? To talk about problems, and the way we solve problems just fundamentally changed. And FinOps is doing the same thing.
Absolutely agree. It's very similar, and to all those people who don't understand the shift, just go try to implement waterfall for a couple of sprint cycles.
We wouldn't have sprint cycles. And then maybe,
See, there you go. You can't even do it. That's right. Yeah. Now there's still, it's like the waterfall method. Remember, sometimes people it's like a natural human thing to get pushed back to like these simplistic ways. So people end up just sticking their head in the sand, doing nothing. But I agree. FinOps it's going to change. It's going to pretty much fix this whole notion of repatriation of your data back on-prem or something like that, which will only work for a few people.
That's a whole nother podcast episode. There's probably half a dozen episodes on,
repatriation,
the shift back. Yeah. So let's leave that for another day. All right. So I think that probably wraps our episode. Head out to Tenacity.ai, check out the platform. You can always hit us up on LinkedIn. Tenacity.ai is the company. You can also hit us up on Reddit /r/cloud cost optimization. Drop your questions, comments, etc. We're happy to address them. And go out and download the Cloud Cost Optimization Handbook. And give us any feedback there. We're happy to add updates. We're always adding updates to it and putting out new material. Thanks everyone for tuning in.